Hey folks, this is Ranker with a Diablo 3 patch 2.6.6 Season 18 video on the best builds. In this video, we'll take a look at around 50 of the top builds in this game, rank the top 10, and then rank them all into different tiers according to their relative power. Now, if you want to skip straight ahead to the top 10, you can follow the timestamp right above here. But I encourage you to stick around for the full video for added context. So first off, in case you haven't seen it, we will be referring to our Season 17 tier list, because we'll be using that as a point of comparison to judge whether or not builds have increased or decreased in power. Furthermore, in the video description, we're going to have links to build guides or at least reference pages to every build covered in this tier list. These aren't all yet updated for Season 18 patch 266. However, updates will be rolling out over time, and what follows now will be a general guide on how these builds may have changed based on the new items in patch 266. So first off, if a build had a Hellfire amulet in it, typically what we see now is a replacement for either Squirt's Necklace or the Flavor of Time amulet. If it's a ranged build and you can avoid taking damage, then Squirts is the way to go. Why? While not taking damage, your damage is increased by up to 100%, and damage taken is also increased by up to 50%. If you can make use of it, this power far outweighs any passive ability that a Hellfire amulet can give you. The alternative amulet is the Flavor of Time, which now makes it such that pylon effects last twice as long. And as you've surely experienced, getting lucky with a pylon can make or break a greater rift. So the Flavor of Time will take your luck and double it. Squirts is the better amulet. It's consistent, but the Flavor of Time is still the superior choice to a Hellfire amulet in most cases. And these two amulets could also be used in the cube for builds that can sacrifice an existing cubed piece of jewelry. Furthermore, we've seen that builds with a cubed furnace are typically having that furnace replaced by an echoing fury in cases where you actually can benefit from the increased attack speed. The new echoing fury's power is slaying enemies engulfs the wielder into a frenzy, which means killing enemies increases your attack speed by 15% and move speed by 5%, stacking up to 5 times. Once you get this buff going, it could be really beneficial. Next, pretty much all barbarian builds are working in Mortic's Brace. This is a completely new item. Well, not entirely the case. It was introduced into PTR years ago, scrapped, now it's being resurrected, and what it does is Wrath of the Berserker gains the effect of every rune. This translates into an increase in power level for barbarians, some builds more than others, but any build that has significant or complete uptime on Wrath of the Berserker will be using this item. Next, pretty much all Legacy of Nightmares builds are moving on to using the Legacy of Dreams gem. This is a new gem that effectively captures onto it the seasonal theme of Season 17. Its power, while you have no set bonuses equipped, every legendary item you have equipped increases your damage dealt and reduces your damage taken. The rank 25 power, this bonus is doubled for ancient items. So at max rank, this gem is the equivalent of having the full benefit of the Legacy of Nightmares set. Now, for Season 17 Legacy of Nightmares builds, this translates into a drop in power due to the loss of one legendary gem to make room for this legendary gem. However, many of the Legacy of Nightmares builds are able to work in at least one of the new items, which generally makes up for this loss in power, and sometimes even more. Further, the best thing about this legendary gem is that it works for more than just ancient items. Legacy of Dreams is going to make gearing, is going to make the early game a lot easier and more versatile. Next, builds that require ridiculous amounts of cooldown and base all their damage around a very short damage window can benefit from Messerschmitt's Reaver. Its new power reduces the remaining cooldown on one of your skills by 1 second when you slay an enemy, so this is specifically beneficial to Necromancers with respect to Land of the Dead. Then lastly, any sets that can work in Captain Crimson's can generally see a rise in power, especially if the build already uses a lot of cooldown and resource cost reduction, because this set now piles on even more cooldown and more resource cost reduction and gives you buffs to damage and to your toughness based on how much you have. So many even most builds have risen in power to some degree by at least 1 to a few greater rifts by incorporating these items. And then lastly, as a general note, the theme of Season 18, Season of the Triune, which creates circles of power on the ground whenever you kill an enemy. The circle stays up for 7 seconds, and it's randomly determined to be one of 3 circles, either cooldown reduction, double damage, or resource cost reduction. Ranged builds will benefit more from these than melee builds. Mobile builds will benefit more from these than less mobile builds. And builds that benefit from cooldown and resource will benefit more than those that do not. Alright, now as we move into this season's tier list, one thing to bear in mind is that I've redefined some of the tiers in order to avoid the A-tier congestion we had from last season's list. We had about 20 builds in the A tier. Out of 50, that's a huge number. So this time I've spaced them out a little better, but don't let that lead you to believe that fewer builds are viable now. Every build on this list is viable. Every build on this list can let you do a GR 100. And if you're really dedicated, a lot further than that. The top builds of Season 17 performed a couple GRs higher than expected. So we've knocked a few builds out of the F tier. We've brought down other builds in order to space things out, make room. And as a general note, these tier divisions, they're not hard limits. It's a gradient. So there isn't a huge difference in power between a build at the bottom of A tier and the top of B tier. So starting at the bottom with the F tier, F for feeble, but only in comparison to the best builds, there's still great builds. These builds are about 16 to 20 greater rifts behind our top builds. In this tier, we see the Helltooth Gargantuan Witch Doctor, which manages to hold on to its position in the F tier because it's able to incorporate a new item, Spite, a craftable offhand, whose power is non-cleaving gargantuans gain the cleave and chilling effects of the Humongoid rune. So basically, your gargantuans, which are your main source of damage, become more powerful. And further, we can also work in an Echoing Fury. Every other build in this tier has dropped from a previous tier. The Inarius Necromancer drops from D tier. It can now maybe work in a Flavor of Time. The Veer Frozen Orb Wizard drops down from D tier. There is a far more powerful Veer build that basically makes this one obsolete. We got our Unhallowed Essence Grenades Demon Hunter, which might be able to work in an Echoing Fury. That's dropped down from D. But ever since the rise of multi-shot, UE Grenades has just been completely outclassed. We've got the Rathma Singularity Mage Necromancer dropping from D, but honestly, it probably deserves a higher spot on this list. However, it's just far outclassed by the Legacy of Nightmares Singularity Mage build that was introduced in Season 17. But that said, you can probably work in Squirt's Necklace and the Messerschmitt's Reaver to add some power, some punch to this build. Also dropping from D tier, we have the Veer Mantled Heel Lightning Wizard that can maybe work in Echoing Fury. But again, there is a much more powerful Veer build out there. Dropping all the way from C tier, we have the Arakir Witch Doctor. Once the most powerful Witch Doctor build, this one, while powerful, it's extremely squishy, and much more powerful Witch Doctor builds have emerged ever since, and Arakir just has not gotten any love. Also dropping from D, we have the Tragul Corpse Lance Necromancer, which could now maybe work in a Squirts and a Messerschmitt's. But again, there are much more powerful Corpse Lance builds for Necro. And then lastly, in the F tier, we have the Inna Generator build, dropping all the way from C tier. There's a more powerful Generator build out there for monks, and there is a more powerful Inna build as well. On to the D tier. D as in, don't underestimate these builds. We're talking now about 13 to 15 greater rifts behind S tier. And in this tier, we can find the Legacy of Nightmares Heaven's Fury Crusader, dropping down from C tier. But this build could potentially rise higher. It can work in a Flavor of Time Amulet and the Stone Gauntlets. Its new legendary power, getting attacked will slowly turn you to stone. You gain 50% more armor, but your move speed is reduced by 15% and attack speed is reduced by 20. Stacking up to 5 times. This is a build in which your attack speed doesn't matter, so you can benefit from this extra toughness. Next, also dropping from the C tier, we have the Roland Sweep Crusader, which can work in Captain Crimson's, but won't benefit from Captain Crimson's as much as certain other builds. Next, we have the Sunwuko Wave of Light Monk, also dropping from the C tier, also able to work in Captain Crimson's. Next, we have the Rasha Meteor Shower build, which was at some point my favorite build. This one's dropping all the way from the B tier. A big part of that is due to the restructuring, but I like this build so much that it really bears reiterating that all these builds are great. As a point in its favor, it's a less challenging wizard build to run, whereas a lot of the top wizard builds can be very tricky to run properly. Next, we got the Legacy of Nightmares Spirit Barrage Witch Doctor. It's losing a bit of power as it converts to Legacy of Dreams, but it's gaining that flavor of time, still dropping from the B tier. Next, we have the Hammer of the Ancients Immortal King Barbarian, dropping down from B tier, even though it's now able to work in Mortix Brace. That said, Mortix Brace may prove to be a little bit more effective than I thought. It might make it up into the C tier. Of the Hoda build variants, IK is perhaps the easiest one to gear and to run. Then lastly in the D tier, dropping again from B, we have the Uliana Monk, which is now able to greatly benefit from the Captain Crimson set. Next we have the C tier, C as in, can you believe these awesome builds are only in the C tier? Down at the bottom we have the DMO Wizard, the Delzier's Magnum Opus. This is dropping from B tier. It's a solid build. There just happen to be far better wizard builds out there, but with DMO being the starter set for wizard, running a DMO wizard, totally cool. Also dropping from the B tier, we have both the Rasha and the Firebird Star-Packed Wizards. These are two different ways to run one of the trickier wizard builds, but there is a far more powerful variant out there. Next, we have the Whirlwind Barbarian, who is remaining exactly where he was because he's able to benefit from a lot of the new stuff. Flavor of Time, Captain Crimson's, Mortix Brace, and Echoing Fury. It wouldn't surprise me if Whirlwind could squeeze its way into the B tier. Now, new to our list, we have the Legacy of Nightmares Hammer of the Ancients build. This build emerged as powerful in Season 17, but it's not as powerful as the Recramorcen Hammer of the Ancients Barbarian. However, it is able to benefit now from the Flavor of Time, Mortix Brace, and the Echoing Fury. So this certainly gives it an edge, but I still believe it's going to be outclassed by Recramorcen. That said, one thing that bears mentioning here is that what's popular isn't always what's best. When new builds emerge, you sometimes see a trend of players flocking to those new builds because why? The players who have been playing this game a ton, pushing leaderboards, topping leaderboards, they get bored of playing the same build over and over and over again, so when a new build comes out, they're going to be more inclined to use that build and push that build, and then there's a ripple effect throughout the community of people wanting to try the new thing. And so even if it's a little less effective than another build, it might become more popular. Next, also remaining in the C tier is the Leapquake Barbarian, which is a fairly robust build, and it can now also work in a Flavor of Time amulet. Next, dropping down from the A tier, we have the Inna Wave of Light Monk. Still an excellent build, and with Inna being the starter set for the season, this is actually a great build to run, and it leaves you room to progress into a Legacy of Nightmares Wave of Light Monk. Then lastly, in the C tier, dropping down from B, we have two flavors of Condemned Crusader, the Akon variant and the Legacy of Nightmares variant. Legacy of Nightmares can now work in a Flavor of Time, and the Akon variant can now work in Captain Crimson's. Onto the B tier, B as in, boy are these great builds. They're about 8 to 10 GRs behind the S tier. And we start off with the Legacy of Nightmares Wave of Light Monk. Yes, it's a little weaker due to sacrificing one legendary gem, but you're able to work in a Squirt's amulet. In all honesty, Inna and Legacy of Nightmares Wave of Light variants are going to be very similar in power. I suspect that the Legacy of Nightmares version will squeeze its way ahead, but if you prefer to run the Inna variant, you're not going to do yourself a tremendous disservice. Next, also dropping from the A tier, we have the Legacy of Nightmares Singularity Mages build. While also nerfed by the Season 17 to 18 transition, you're able to work in Squirt's Amulet and Messerschmitt's Reaver. Next, we similarly have the Legacy of Nightmares Corpse Lance Necromancer. Exact same story there, Squirts and Messerschmitts, and the exact same thing in fact with our next entry, the Pestilence Necromancer. These will all be very close in power. Next, we have the Impale Demon Hunter using the Shadow set, dropping down from A tier, but only because other builds have emerged to be a little bit more powerful. Impale is still an amazing choice, one of my favorite builds. If I run a hardcore Demon Hunter, I run Impale. And in general, at the start of a season, you see Impale topping the Demon Hunter leaderboards because it is so ridiculously easy to build an Impale Demon Hunter. Next, we have the N6M4 Demon Hunter, also dropping from A tier. This is the 6-piece Natalia, 4-piece Marauder Demon Hunter, which for a time was the top Demon Hunter build, but now other builds have emerged that are more powerful, easier to run as well. Next, we have the Marauder build, which is also dropping from A, but is now able to work in the Captain Crimson set. While historically weaker than N6M4, the ability to work in Captain Crimsons should be able to rocket this build, well, that's a bit of an exaggeration, squeeze it ahead of N6M4. Next, we have the Crusader Hammerden build, dropping from A tier, as well as the Raiment Generator Monk. And then lastly, in the B tier, we have the Charge Barbarian, dropping from A tier, but able to now work in Mortix Brace and the Flavor of Time. Onto the A tier, because these builds are amazing. These builds are only 5 to 7 greater rifts behind the S tier. And for all intents and purposes, I would consider these to also be among the best builds in the game. And starting off at the bottom here, we have the best Barbarian build, in my opinion, the Hammer of the Ancients, Recramorcen Barb, which is now able to work in Mortix Brace. Next, we have the Jade Witch Doctor, a fun build with a very unique playstyle. Jade is now able to work in Captain Crimson's as well as the Echoing Fury. Still, I don't imagine it'll be the most popular Witch Doctor build, given there are far more powerful options. And that takes us into our top 10 builds. Coming in at number 10, and boy am I happy about this, the Unhallowed Essence Multi-Shot Demon Hunter. While this build was never bad, it did suffer a little bit at the highest GRs and fell behind other Demon Hunter builds, but now it's able to work in Squirt's Amulet and the Captain Crimson set, and benefits tremendously from Captain Crimson's because you're stacking cooldown reduction and resource cost reduction. Onto number 9, we have the Invoker Crusader. This is a Thorns build that is now able to work in an Echoing Fury and a Flavor of Time, making it more powerful than it was, but I don't imagine it'll be very popular in the season. It's very difficult to gear for, and for it to perform well, really requires a big investment. There is an easier to run, and arguably much more fun to run, Crusader build out there. Next, we have the Legacy of Nightmares Rapid Fire build, which is up 2 tiers from our C tier. Now, we speculated that LON Rapid Fire Demon Hunter could perform better than we had placed it, and that very much turned out to be the case. Now, it's also able to work in a Flavor of Time, so while it loses some power due to losing a gem, it makes up for it a little bit. But something completely new to the list is the Natalia Rapid Fire build. In fact, we've removed our old Natalia entry because, as far as I'm concerned, this is the only way to run Natalia now. Natalia Rapid Fire proved to be very powerful, and it can now work in Captain Crimson's set, and I believe should be able to surpass the LON Rapid Fire build, but they'll be pretty close. That takes us to number 6, the Legacy of Nightmares Captain America Crusader. That's the Blessed Shield build, and this is going to be the best and the most popular, I imagine, Crusader build in Season 18. Yes, we're losing some power from Season 17, but we can work in a Flavor of Time, which helps make up for it a little bit. And then lastly, in the A tier, coming in at number 5, we have the Zunimasa Dagger of Darts Witch Doctor, which is now able to work in an Echoing Fury. That takes us to our S tier. S as in seriously OP. Like, I wouldn't be upset if these were nerfed. Coming in at number 4, we have the Legacy of Nightmares Dagger of Darts Witch Doctor. And it's a pretty close race between that and Zuni, or at least it was, but in Season 18, in patch 266, it's now able to work in Squirt's Amulet, Echoing Fury, and Flavor of Time. That should put it considerably ahead of Zunimasa, whereas previously they were about equal, with Zuni having more damage, but Legacy of Nightmares having more survivability. The Legacy of Nightmares version should now squarely be able to do more damage than the Zuni version. Next, we have the Legacy of Nightmares Thorn's Pet Necromancer. It was in the S tier last season, and it's remaining solidly in the S tier this season. Yes, it's losing a bit of power due to the loss of a gem from Legacy of Dreams, but it's also benefiting now from Squirt's Amulet. Coming in at number 2, we have the Legacy of Nightmares Bazooka Archon Wizard. This one is also hit by that Season 17 to 18 transition, but it can now work in a Flavor of Time. And that takes us to number 1, the Vir Chantodo Wizard. This is up from the A tier last season. It's not losing any power, and it can now work in a Squirt's Amulet. It's going to be a tight race for that #1 spot, but I feel that Vir Chantoto should be able to outperform Bazooka. And that is going to wrap up this tier list video. But do be sure to check out other guides on this channel. We got guides for all classes, and check back often in the next couple weeks for more and updated builds. Also, as a quick reminder, we're doing a t-shirt drive. If you want to get your name on the Rikers Raiders 2019 t-shirt and banner and merchandise, you have until September 1st to do so. Only $1 gets your name on the shirt. Check out this video for the details. And that's going to wrap up this video. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider pledging on YouTube or Patreon and unlocking behind-the-scenes content, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rikers Raiders for more Diablo content.